Welcome to The Explainer, and today we're looking at a machine that didn't just change transportation, it completely, absolutely transformed modern society. We're diving into the Ford Model T. You know, it wasn't just a car. It was the catalyst that quite literally put the whole world on wheels.
Let's jump right in. Right at the dawn of the 20th century, Henry Ford outlined this incredibly ambitious vision. He straight up declared, "I will build a motor car for the great multitude." And he meant it. He pictured a vehicle large enough for the whole family, but small enough for just one person to maintain. It had to be built with the best materials, but here's the crucial part. It had to be priced so low that anyone making a decent salary could actually buy one.
And man, the public was just starving for exactly that. When the Model T finally rolled out in the fall of 1908, the response was, well, it was absolutely staggering. Within just 2 days, literally 48 hours of its release, 15,000 orders were placed. 15,000! It wasn't just popular, it was an instant overnight phenomenon.
Section 1. The car for the multitude. So, think about what it was like before the Model T. Automobiles were this crazy luxury strictly reserved for the super wealthy. They were rare, they broke down all the time, and they carried this massive price tag. We're talking $2,000 to $3,000, which was a fortune back then. The Model T totally shattered that paradigm. It debuted as this reliable, easy-to-fix machine, starting at just $850. Now, while Henry Ford was the guy directing the vision and overseeing the whole project, we absolutely have to recognize the technical masterminds who actually engineered the thing. The real design and engineering triumphs, those were the work of a few key guys, specifically Hungarian immigrant engineers Joseph A. Galamb and Eugene Farkas, along with the designer named Childe Harold Wills. These are the guys who actually brought the nuts and bolts of the Tin Lizzie to life.
And, even before the Model T hit mass adoption, these early cars were already forcing society to scramble and adapt. Get this, in Houston, Texas, the very first speeding ticket was handed out in 1903 to a guy named T. Brady. His big crime? He was going over the blistering speed limit of 6 miles per hour on Main Street. So as the Model T flooded the market just a few years later, you can imagine how this need for new laws, paved roads, and actual infrastructure just multiplied exponentially all over the world.
Section 2. Anatomy of Tin Lizzie. Okay, here's a wild thought. If you were to hop into a Model T today, your modern driving skills wouldn't help you at all. Seriously, it had completely unorthodox driving controls. There was no standard brake pedal like we're used to. Instead, you had these 3 floor pedals that controlled the clutch, the reverse gear, and a transmission brake. And your speed? Well, that was controlled by a little throttle lever mounted right on the steering wheel, which managed a 2-speed planetary gear transmission. Driving this thing required a totally unique set of coordinated movements. It was like learning to drive all over again.
And actually, it gets even quirkier than that. Because the gas tank was often tucked right under the front seat, the fuel was fed to the engine purely by gravity. No fuel pumps. So if you came up to a steep hill, the gas literally couldn't flow up to the engine. So what was the solution? Well, drivers frequently had to turn the whole car around and drive up steep hills completely backward. This let them use the powerful reverse gear and made sure gravity kept feeding gas to the engine. How crazy is that?
Section 3. The assembly line revolution.
In the early days, right around 1908, building these cars by hand severely limited how many they could actually make. But everything changed by 1913. At the Highland Park plant, Ford introduced the moving assembly line. It was a total game changer. By breaking the labor down into 84 highly specific steps, the time it took to assemble a single car plummeted from 12.5 hours down to just 93 minutes by 1914. I mean, they had cars rolling off the line every 3 minutes. And as production volume just absolutely skyrocketed, going from roughly 10,000 cars in 1909 to almost 2 million by 1925, this beautiful thing called economies of scale kicked in. Basically, the fixed costs were spread out over way more vehicles, and Ford actually passed those savings directly on to the consumer. They slashed the price of a runabout model from $825 all the way down to an astonishing $260.
Section 4. Any color except black?
Now, I'm sure we've all heard that famous quote attributed to Henry Ford from his autobiography, "Any customer can have a car painted any color that he wants, so long as it is black." It's a great line, right? It perfectly captures that strict standardization of the assembly line, but historically speaking, it's actually kind of misleading.
The real story is that for the first few years of production, from 1908 to 1913, the Model T wasn't even available in black. Seriously, depending on the body style you wanted, early buyers could pick from gray, green, midnight blue, or red. That infamous black-only policy didn't actually go into effect until 1914.
So the real question is, why did they suddenly switch to black? Well, it all came down to chemistry and, of course, cost. Carbon black pigment was just the cheapest stuff out there. Plus, the paints back then relied heavily on something called gilsonite. It's a form of bitumen that made these cheap metal paints super durable. But because gilsonite is naturally so dark, it severely limited your final color options to, well, very dark shades. So Japan black paint became the ultimate, cost-effective choice to keep that mass production humming.
Section 5. Beyond the paved road.
Remember how we talked about the lack of paved roads? Well, because of that, the Model T was intentionally designed to be almost like a portable engine, and people got incredibly creative with it. Owners and aftermarket companies were constantly modifying them. They converted them into farm tractors, fire engines like the ones modified by the American LaFrance Company, and even ambulances that saw heavy use during World War I. Up in the frozen parts of Canada, they even turned them into snow flyers, outfitting them with actual skis and continuous tracks just to deliver the rural mail.
Oh, and get this. An issue of Fordson Farmer magazine from 1922 actually featured a minister who completely transformed his Model T into a mobile church. I'm not kidding. He even outfitted the thing with a small organ. It just goes to show, this wasn't just a car, it was a flexible platform for quite literally whatever society needed it to be.
Section 6. A lasting global legacy.
The Model T also holds the distinction of being the very first truly global car. It was being assembled simultaneously in countries all over the planet. We're talking Canada, England, Argentina, Denmark, and even Japan. In fact, after the massive devastation of World War I, there was a huge shortage of horses in Europe. So European farmers relied heavily on the imported Model T to pull their plows and mechanize all their rebuilding efforts.
Now here's a really surprising byproduct of the Model T, and it's something you probably still use today. To build all those early cars, Ford had to harvest vast amounts of timber. But Henry Ford was not a guy who liked waste. So he gathered up all the wood scraps from the mills, distilled them down for chemicals, and then took the leftover byproduct, which was lump charcoal, and pressed it into briquettes. He teamed up with his cousin by marriage, a guy named E.G. Kingsford, to mass market it. Yep, that recycling effort birthed what we all know today as Kingsford charcoal. Pretty wild, right?
Finally, on May 26, 1927, Henry Ford and his son Edsel drove the 15 millionth Model T out of the Highland Park factory. 15 million? That marked the official end of its U.S. production. And by that point, half the cars in the entire world were Fords. It literally remained the best-selling car in human history for decades.
It brought mobility to the masses, it completely reshaped global manufacturing, and it physically altered the landscapes of our cities forever. It really makes you wonder, as we sit here looking at the rapid pace of technological change today, what modern innovation is going to impact the 21st century as profoundly as the Model T impacted the 20th? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.